The noble bow. From the earliest days of human history, the bow was used by hunter-gatherers to hunt fearsome beasts. It was also used as a symbol of justice by heroes like Robin Hood to protect the innocent. Of course, these days the bow is mostly used as a recreational weapon, something that you can master without all those negative connotations of modern firearms. And most recently of all, we've translated the bow into many different video games, but it's really VR that has made the bow a really exciting weapon to use again. Today we're going to be looking at Sacralith, the Archer's Tau, on the HTC Vive.
So Sacralith is an archery game. You shoot the bow, you kill the guys, but it does also have a loose narrative tying it all together. You're looking for the titular Sacralith, a magic stone that grants you the power over dragons. This is a story that exists just enough to justify why you're moving between these levels in this mostly dark, medieval fantasy environment. It's definitely a tongue-in-cheek experience. If there was any doubt this was going to be a thoroughly serious game, here's how the opening cinematic is presented.
12 master wizards guard the secret of stone that grants control over dragons. With a thwarted never use it, even a Gamtech rank his foes.
And for all its dark and broody marketing artwork and the brutality of the gameplay itself, there are times the game crosses over to the absurd. Some might find that tonal difference a bit jarring, but I thought it worked quite well. It's enough story to give you a little bit of purpose, but not too much that you're desperately skipping through waiting for the next piece of action. So in each level, you'll be trying to defend these two guys who look a lot like Ezio from the Assassin's Creed games, as they try to carve their way through a variety of different enemies on the way to their ultimate goal. You lose the game if either of these two die, so your main objective is to keep as many enemies off these guys as possible. It could be described as a wave or tower defense game in that sense, and I think maybe this combination of a fairly saturated market for archery games and wave defense games has led to Sacralith flying under the radar for a lot of people. However, I think that's doing the game a bit of a disservice, as it feels different from other archery games on offer right now. In Sacralith, there's more time for a level of strategy in how and when you pick your targets. The game uses a simple teleportation system for movement, and although you can teleport yourself down into the fray for some easy kills, you're normally better off perching on a higher vantage point to get an overall lay of the land and then working out who best to kill and in what order from there. I mean, you're generally safe 90% of the time anyway, and while it does lead to an easier, more sedate experience than, say, Hollow Point, it's also one you can play for longer periods of time without getting worn out. There's a whole tech tree of different arrows that you can use during the game, and many of them focus on either crowd control or time management, allowing you to take out vast amounts of lower level enemies or freeze time for long enough to line up a perfect shot on a larger enemy. It's a surprisingly deep strategy for an archery game, and the combination of picking the right arrow at the right time while also having the skill to hit the target of your choice is great fun. Hitting those targets does feel great. The game uses the same archery control of many of its peers. You pull your hand behind your back to grab an arrow, and you aim the bow with both hands as you might in real life. There's some good haptic feedback as you draw, and the arrows and the physics of those arrows feel realistic most of the time. The single most important thing with an archery game is getting the feeling of the bow right, and Sacralith simply nails it. There wasn't a moment where I felt like the bow let me down, and when you get into the flow of the game, you feel awesome hitting down enemy after enemy as you protect these two guys as they march through the level. The reason archery games have been so common in VR is the action you do with a bow in real life is pretty much completely mimicked within the game. There's no abstraction as you might find with guns or physical combat, and this increased immersion is well matched with the game's graphics. Some excellent character designs and environments that, if not vibrant, are at least detailed and varied for the game's relatively short runtime. It's been a while since standing on a high ledge in VR has made me feel worried about getting too close to the edge, but Sacralith actually nails that feeling. And its tongue-in-cheek narrative also extends to its level design. One minute you're on this bridge with rock music blowing out, feeling like you're fucking 4, and literally the next level you're doing this. Unfortunately, for all my praise, I've had some major problems with Sacralith. In fact, in my playthrough, I spent as much time with the headset off as I did immersed in the game. There were multiple game-breaking bugs, from crashes to desktops using the Unreal Engine 4 errors, to enemies and checkpoints simply not triggering midway through a level. There was a patch released just as I was writing this script that does seem to address most of those concerns, but I've got no idea exactly how well it fixes those problems. For a full release, it was pretty disappointing, but hopefully some of the more glaring issues have been resolved. Beyond the major bugs, there are a few concerns I have with the pacing and difficulty of the game. I actually found those mid-game levels, where you still hadn't unlocked all your powers, to be harder than anything towards the end of the game. Certain paths in that tech tree do seem really overpowered compared to others. For example, maxing out your healing arrows early grants you close to invincibility, providing you pace the use of those arrows and you have a good shot. Likewise, some of the magical crowd control arrows, like the ability to freeze time or simply just make big explosions, seem far more powerful than the more situational weaponry, like the railgun. I appreciate that there are some level of experimentation and finding the tools you'll enjoy. It would just be nice if the game provided more mechanical reasons to pick up certain upgrades. The upgrade system itself does lack a bit of polish as well. There's no way to change your choice once you've pressed on something. There's vague descriptions in some of the upgrades, and certain upgrades just flat out don't work on some enemies. The freezing arrow I put a bunch of points into early on just refuses to work with these birds in a later level, while other arrows do. How am I supposed to know which works and which doesn't? The game is also relatively short. Personally, I didn't find that much of an issue. Normal difficulty is going to take you anything from 2 to 6 hours to complete, and harder difficulty should provide a longer challenge after that. Although the levels are fairly small and self-contained, the AI is just interesting enough that playing the same level multiple times doesn't feel too repetitive. And unless you're really good at the game, you won't even see half the texture in your first run through. It would have been nice to have additional paths for each level, or perhaps challenges to be completed outside of the main story, but this isn't a massively expensive game anyway, and there's enough variety here in the types of enemies, the types of levels, and the types of arrows to make it a worthwhile experience. I'm really happy to see that major bug fix drop. It shows the devs are working on the major issues, and hopefully the people that pick up Sacralith now will get to experience closer to what the developers intended. As pre-patch, the game simply wasn't stable enough for me to properly enjoy. I want to be able to give the game a full glowing recommendation, which I can't do. I just feel like it needs longer in the oven, both in terms of its leveling mechanics and its overall polish. But this is very nearly the best archery game available in VR right now, and it's absolutely one to watch. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope this was helpful to you. And if you need any more content on VR, indie, and retro stuff, please give us a subscribe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.